and welcome to the Unknown Webcast. This is just a bit of a trigger warning for those who believe words are more injurious than sticks and stones. I really am so conservative, I can't turn left even when I'm driving.
That's true.
In addition to giving trigger warnings to our viewers, Ron Hensel and I both drink coffee
Yep.
for your protection. This week, Dr. Donald Williams joins us to explain answers from Islam. Aslan. How about that?
Islam?
Answers
Oh,
from Aslan, not
yeah,
Islam. No.
Islam. Ah,
My name is Don Vino. I'm president of Midwest Christian Outreach Inc. in Wonder Lake, Illinois, which produces the Unknown Webcast. And our senior researcher is Ron Hensel, who will introduce the sponsors of today's webcast. And here is Ronnie Baby.
greetings from sunny Florida, where the palm tree came out, saw its shadow, and now we have 12 more months of summer. Our sponsor for this edition of the Unknown Webcast is the Designer Jesus Collection. No longer need your Jesus be a source of social embarrassment. Check out the Designer Jesus Collection. Our regular legal disclaimer. Our guest on today's webcast, insert name here, that would be Dr. Donald Williams, has no connection whatsoever to any of the satirical content of the Unknown Webcast, hereafter referred to as the webcast, although we probably will not mention it again. This satirical content includes any and all commercials, end credits, puns, smart remarks, or anything else that might fall under the definition of satire. In the meantime, Midwest Christian Outreach Inc. bears no liability for or responsibility for anyone's opinions regarding this satirical content. Notice the opinions expressed on this webcast are ours and should be yours too. If you enjoy it or if it really annoys you and you want to inflict it on someone else to ensure your continued access, please go to midwestoutreach.org. Click the yellow donate button and contribute as you feel led. And as you do, never fear, this webcast is Y2K compliant. And don't forget to subscribe to us on your favorite video channels. And now our very special guest, Dr. Donald Williams. I can see you're overwhelmed by your
reception. Yeah. Fake applause is always gratifying.
Yes, it's about as sincere as we get here.
So, one can hope that that's the only thing on the show that is fake, but I assure you, this is how I actually look. There's nothing fake about that.
Yeah. Well, the fact checkers haven't chimed in yet, so we'll find out.
We will, but it does demonstrate how
fact checkers. That's so amateurish. Why not have fact chess?
That's what I always say. You're just playing. Or even better, 3D chess. Fact 3D chess.
Well, at least we can see, Don, that you are bright indeed.
Yeah, a very bright guy.
So, oh my, it gets worse from here, I'm afraid. Yeah, just before we went on, we were talking that we have the meeting of the two Dons here. Then we sort of got off into a discussion on the Godfather. And I was kind of sharing that years ago when I was in construction business, one of the clients I had was notorious for not returning calls. And I called several times and left a message, with the secretary saying, please let him know Don Vino called and return my call at his earliest convenience. And so after about, I don't know, a week, and my name is French, it's not Italian, so that kind of throws people. But I said, leave a message. This is Don Vino. Please have him call. And she stopped for a moment and said, is my boss in some kind of a trouble? So interesting days. Yeah.
Most people that have a habit of talking to Don are in some kind of trouble.
Yeah, that's true. And oftentimes I make it all on my own. I'm pretty good at that. So we are talking about, if I can do this correctly, yes, here we go. A book that she came out with titled Answers from Aslan, not Islam. The Enduring Apologetics of C.S. Lewis. Now, just as we get started here, before we start going through what the book is about, and I mentioned this to you when we spoke yesterday, there is sometimes the concern or question, well, wait a minute. wasn't he Catholic or Church of England or something like that? And how could he say anything that really is helpful to us? To which your response is what?
Well, he was Church of England, Anglican, but was a principled Protestant. You can't really tell from reading his books because he had a policy of dealing with mere Christianity and trying to stay away from issues that divided Christians from each other, denominational distinctives. But in his private letters, he allowed himself to address issues that he stayed away from in his published works. And you can tell from that he doesn't just happen to be in the Church of England. He is a principled Protestant. He rejected Mary as a mediator. He rejected the infallibility of the Pope. He rejected a number of things that are official Catholic doctrine. So he was Church of England. If that, that puts him in some pretty lousy theological company. I mean, you've got people like J.I. Packer.
Yeah, right.
John R.W. Stott.
Yeah, John Stott, J.C. Ryle, all kinds of Church of England people that if you're too orthodox to deal with them, then I'm not sure you understand what orthodoxy actually is.
Well, and that is pretty often the case. Now, there are clearly issues. Roman Catholic soteriology is a serious problem, I think. But that is not what Lewis is advocating for.
No. And if you're interested in Lewis's theology, the earlier book that I wrote called Deeper Magic, The Theology Behind the Writings of C.S. Lewis, is the place to go, where I lay out all these things. We go through the entire table of contents of systematic theology and the entirety of Lewis's body of work, his writings, including everything that was published and some things that weren't, to say, okay, what did Lewis have to say about this? What are its strengths and weaknesses as a guide to biblical truth? It has a lot of strengths. It has a few weaknesses. But that's Deeper Magic. Today we're talking about answers from Aslan.
We are.
Which are very different from the answers you would get from Islam.
And we're glad of that.
This is Lewis's Apologetics. Lewis was probably the greatest Christian apologist of the 20th century, maybe of all time. And his apologetics has been extremely effective. There are a number of people who are Christians because they read Lewis. For example, the best example would be Charles Colson, who, when he was in jail as a result of Watergate, read Mere Christianity, and as a result of that became a believer and became one of the most solid, head-on straight type of spokesman that conservative Christianity had in America up to the time of his death. So Charles Colson was converted by reading Mere Christianity, and numberless Christians have either been converted or confirmed in their faith by discovering Lewis in a time of doubt. So we're thinking about not primarily Lewis, the writer of children's fantasy, although the title might make you think we were, Answers from Aslan. We're thinking about Lewis, the Christian apologist. So we're thinking about books like Mere Christianity, Miracles, Problem of Pain, Abolition of Man. And those books are all still very popular, very widely read. And a lot of people get a great deal of benefit from reading them. But what people don't realize is they're all 80 years old.
Right.
They were all written during World War II. So they're 80 years old plus. And the world is a radically different place today than it was when Lewis was writing. So there are a couple of aspects of that that make using Lewis, just handing people a copy of Mere Christianity, isn't as effective an evangelistic technique or an apologetic technique as it used to be. Because for one thing, Lewis was writing, even though Lewis was writing to uneducated British laymen, college-educated people today have a harder time following him because he's so linear.
Right.
You know, I when I started teaching freshman composition at Tacoma Falls College, I thought I'll use Mere Christianity as the textbook. So we got the greatest Christian writer of the 20th century, and so you can read what he wrote, and that'll give you a great role model for what good expository writing looks like, how it sounds, and it'll also give us interesting things to discuss and write our papers about. I had to give it up because 80% of these are college freshmen now.
Right.
These 80% of them couldn't deal with it. It was too linear. Now, Lewis is very clear. He's very lucid. He's not hard to follow. But the problem for today's kids is that if you don't get point A, if you don't get sentence A, you're going to be totally lost in sentence B. Because sentence number 2 is going to assume that you understood number 1 and remember what it said. And so you build line by line, precept by precept, but it's all very linear. And most of those kids couldn't do it. About 20% of them loved it. The other 80% just could not follow it because their attention span had been destroyed by social media.
Now think about this. We have attention spans have been getting shorter and shorter and shorter since the time that Lewis was writing. And also scholarly arguments have been getting more and more vague and obfuscatory, if you will. I just heard a story the other day. You've heard of William, I think it's William Pinker. He's a Canadian he's a psychiatrist who specializes in cognitive studies. When he was 19 years old at his college in Canada, the name escapes me, he submitted a paper and the professor handed it back to him with red ink on it that said, "Your writing is too clear to be considered serious scholarship."
I've had editors say that to me.
And it's like, he decided, he first of all, he just found this. He's in his 70s now. So when he was 19, we're talking the early 70s. You already had professors who insisted that you be as ambiguous as possible to be considered serious scholarship.
Right. So attention spans have been getting shorter. Scholarly arguments have been getting longer, although they don't say anything.
And deliberately unclear.
Yeah.
Just so they get published. And Pinker,
even though Lewis is not unclear, he is very linear. And kids today have never been taught how to deal with that. They've never had
well, that's clear. I mean, to me, linear writing is the epitome of clarity.
Yeah.
But if you're a kid who's used to having things so vague that they're over your head, and you think, well, this is what really smart people write. This is the way really smart people write.
Yeah.
Because that's what my college professors, are constantly shoveling at me. Well,
and
then
this is an issue dealing with the intelligentsia. And Christian intelligentsia who don't already know what they can get from Lewis are prejudiced against him because his writing is so clear, it must be simplistic. But I'm thinking more in terms of the general populace whose issue.
One more thought. Albert Einstein said, if you can't explain the theory of relativity in a way that a 5-year-old can understand it, it's probably not true. So in other words, clarity and simplicity is not the hallmark of being wrong. It's in fact
no.
It's in fact a hallmark of being right. Some
Mhm.
things are just too difficult to explain, but he even picked his own theory, which is pretty hard to understand.
Well, Lewis said that if you can't translate your thoughts into the language of the common people, you probably don't understand them yourself.
Right. Exactly.
So very similar comment. Problem number one is the audience has no experience dealing with linear thought. Problem number two is that the worldview has changed radically as well. Lewis saw this coming, and yet he didn't have to deal with relativism on the steroid bulked up level that we face. The very interesting comment in Mere Christianity, where he's giving the moral argument for theism. There is a moral law that is universal and absolute. The best explanation for the existence of this moral law is that there's a moral lawgiver. And so he's explaining how to explain this to people. And he's saying, people will give you examples of this whenever they argue about something. And people have this law that's implanted in their heads, but they don't follow it. And when they don't follow it, they make up excuses. They're probably not going to say, "To hell with your standard." They will make up excuses why it doesn't really apply to them, or they have some reason why it was well, today, there are plenty of people who are absolutely ready to say, "To heck with your standard." And so the moral argument is still a good argument. The prior existence of a moral lawgiver is the best explanation for the moral law that we all have to deal with. But today's audience, even if they're willing to follow the linear line of reasoning to take you there, may need an extra step or two to get there over what Lewis gave when he was speaking to his audience. He could make assumptions about his audience we can no longer make about ours.
Right.
Bottom line is that there is a role for us as go-betweens between Lewis. This is just so ironic because Lewis was writing for uneducated laymen, and now he goes over the head of a lot more people than he ever did before. So he needs us to serve as ambassadors, to serve as translators, actually.
Translators, right.
Between him and the audience, because they won't be as able as Chuck Colson's generation was.
Yeah.
And
not only
see it for themselves.
Not only is linear thinking kind of fallen by the wayside, but just manners of expression, cultural references. There's a whole bunch of things that the kids today are not going to want to bother researching and investigating.
Yeah.
So
what I do in this book is this is the definitive analysis, evaluation, and practical guide to using Lewis's apologetics. So I go through each one of Lewis's major arguments that he used. The moral argument we already mentioned from Mere Christianity. The ontological argument. If we have time, I'll explain what that is.
Well, first we should explain before you move on, so that those who are unfamiliar with language, tell them what ontological means.
Ontological has to do with existence, with reality, what is real.
Right.
So Lewis used the moral argument. Everybody knows that, who's read Mere Christianity. A lot of people have missed the fact that Lewis used the ontological argument. It's not as obvious. The ontological argument says that God exists and has always existed, but he doesn't exist like you and I do. Okay, so I exist, but there's no necessity that I exist. I don't exist necessarily. I exist contingently. If my mom and dad don't meet at a USO event prior to my dad's shipping out to Europe in World War II, there's no me. You deprive me of oxygen, and in a matter of minutes, there will be no me in this world. Deprive me of food and water, and it'll take days or weeks, but you're going to get the same result. I exist, but I don't have to exist. I might or might not exist. Eventually, as far as this plane of existence is concerned, I won't exist. I will prove that I'm contingent by dying and rotting. I do hope to put the demonstration off as long as possible. You'll have to just take my word for it for now. I'm not going to give you the demonstration, but God doesn't exist like that. And so the ontological argument says God is that being greater than which none other can be conceived, a being that just happened to exist wouldn't be that. So if you are asking whether or not God exists, well, you're not actually thinking about God yet. When you understand who and what God is, the thing that necessarily has to exist, then you realize God's existence is not really open to question. Now, that's a more philosophical and difficult argument than the ones Lewis usually used. And so naturally, he put it in one of the Narnia books. He did it for children.
Right.
And nobody realized this until a few years ago. I wrote an article about it in Touchstone, where I was reading Lewis's letters, and he happens to mention to his brother Warney in passing, oh yeah, in the silver chair, I put in a passage that's the ontological argument in a form suitable for children. And okay, let's go look that up and see if we can figure out how that's true. So if you're interested in that, you can find it in the book. Moral argument, the ontological argument, the argument from reason, from miracles. Lewis said, in order for any thought to be valid, then reason must itself be valid. And the atheist worldview, the materialist, secularist worldview cannot be true, because if it were true, then your thoughts would be nothing more than chemical reactions happening in your head.
Right.
So if the atheist is right, then I believe in God because I have a certain set of chemical reactions happening in my head. He believes in no God because he has a different set. Well, how can one chemical reaction be true or false about another chemical reaction? In order for anything to be true, there has to be a situation that makes truth possible. And the atheist worldview means nobody has truth, including the atheist. So the atheist might as well not be arguing for atheism, because he's cutting the limb off that he's trying to sit on. The trilemma is most popularly known as the Lord, Liar, Lunatic argument. You get that in Mere Christianity as well, and also in the Narnia books. I'll use the Narnian example and then apply that to the New Testament, just so you understand what this is. So Lucy goes through the wardrobe into Narnia, discovers this entire world that the wardrobe is a door to, and then her brother and her brothers and her other sister think she's going nuts, and so they go to Professor Kirk, and they're worried about Lucy. And well, why are you worried about her? She thinks there's this world in the wardrobe. Well, how do you know there's not? Is Lucy, would you say that she's an honest person? No, she never lies. Okay. There are only three possibilities. Either your sister is lying, or she's mad, or she's telling the truth. Now, you tell me she's not a liar, and it's plain to anybody who meets her that she's not mad. So until any further evidence turns up, we must assume she's telling the truth. Well,
Right.
in mere Christianity, Jesus claims to be God in the Gospels. Well, the standard approach, most people don't think Jesus was God, but they do think he was a great moral teacher, like Confucius or somebody like that. But wait a minute. If Jesus claimed to be God, he was either lying, in which case he's not a great moral teacher, or he was insane, in which case he's not a trustworthy moral teacher, or he's telling the truth. And if he's telling the truth, then he was God. So that's an argument for the deity of Christ. The argument from desire. Lewis said, if I discover that I have these desires, but nothing in this world ever satisfies them, it can do so on a short-term basis. In the long run, nothing does. So if I desire something that nothing in this world can fully satisfy, that kind of points to the fact maybe I was made for another world. And so there are a couple of more, but I go through all of the arguments, and for each one, I lay it out. I say, here is the steps, okay? In case your nonlinear mind couldn't discern them from the way Lewis explains it in the book. Here are the steps, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, that lead to this conclusion.
Okay.
This is how the argument works. Then the next thing I do is I say, here are the critiques. Here are the critics who have tried to refute this argument. And I show that their refutations fail. Is still a good argument. Then the third part in each chapter is I say, okay, now, how can we best use this argument with the audience that we have to deal with, not the still Christian consensus type people who just didn't happen to believe the gospel yet that Lewis was writing to, but the kind of radical post-Christian world that we live in. How do we need to adjust this or tweak it, or maybe add some steps to it to make it effective with the audience we're trying to reach, so that when you get the sum total of all of it, the purpose of the book is for Lewis, not just for us to learn to parrot Lewis, or not just so we can hand somebody Mere Christianity and hope they get it, but to use Lewis as a role model to teach us how to do our own apologetic in our own voice for our own generation, our own audience.
Okay,
and
now
that's the goal of the book. So
hold that thought. Hold that thought.
Chapters leads up to that.
Hold that thought. Now we have 2 comments and then a break, which is attempting to communicate in a concise and sequential manner is rather difficult in today's culture, possibly because of redefining terms and a lack of absolute truth. And the second one kind of builds on that. So many things seem unreal in this world since we are not made for this world. Lewis points this out, and I see it everywhere in the world and in people's thoughts, actions, and deeds. Quick comment on those?
Yeah, I think they're both absolutely right. I mean, I've been talking about linearity, but the redefinition of terms, I mean, this is always something you got to be prepared to do in any discussion, is to define your terms. And so you need to know what they mean yourself so that you explain them. And you simply cannot assume that a non-Christian starts out knowing what you mean by your words, especially if you're using Christian jargon. And that's one of the great things about Lewis, is that he expresses biblical truths, but not in the standard words that Christians have used to turn them into cliches.
Yeah.
And you're trying to convince somebody that something is true when he probably doesn't even believe, or thinks he doesn't believe, that there's such a thing as truth.
Right.
In the first place.
Right.
So that ends up having to be part of the discussion as well. But, people are not as relativistic as they think they are.
Especially when it comes to their money,
Yeah,
that's true.
Yeah.
So we're gonna come back to that in a moment because we do want to hear from our sponsor.
Yeah, because they have some questions. Not these questions, but these other questions here. Do you cringe when the Christians you hang out with try to introduce Jesus to your non-Christian friends? Well, you can say goodbye to days when your church's Jesus was a source of social embarrassment. Now, even your church can keep pace with the latest fashion forward trends in spirituality. Introducing the Designer Jesus Collection. These amazing new Jesus styles are hitting church runways in the most exclusive Jesus fashion shows at churches near you. You don't want to miss Yoga Jesus, Hipster Jesus, Buddy Jesus, Socialist Jesus, Mormon Jesus, and of course, Muslim Jesus. At Designer Jesus Collection fashion shows, you will find a Jesus you'll be proud to introduce to your most sophisticated, cutting edge friends and acquaintances. Please observe the attendance requirements, cost of admission, your eternal soul, required attire, semi-formal. All proceeds benefit His Royal Majesty of the Kingdom of Darkness. The Designer Jesus Collection, London, Paris, Rome, New York, Salt Lake City, and coming to a church runway near you. There you go. Guys,
So,
if you're going to be with the movers and shakers and the muckety mucks,
Well, so speaking of
Muslim Jesus,
changes,
when Don said it was answers from Islam, he wasn't actually having a slip of the tongue. He was being prophetic.
being prophetic. Well, so I mean, this idea of redefining terms and absolute truth that really does come into play, even in as a missionary to cults non-Christian religions. Many of the questions I get is, okay, I have a Mormon friend, and they have to be Christians because they believe in Jesus. Now we have to start with the definition of what Jesus do they believe in, and where does he come from, and so we have to go through that whole defining process in order to even talk intelligibly and intelligently about which Jesus they believe in, and is that the Jesus of the Bible. Same is true with Islam. We have to define what Jesus they're referring to. Is it even the same Jesus or not? So that sort of thing plays out. And then we have a third problem that I've been thinking about as you were talking on this whole communication problem. It's even more of an issue as we get into the younger age groups where many of them, the bulk of their communication is by text messaging on their phones, not an actual discussion and dialogue. So even be able to think through some of these things, even though they're really bright individuals, is difficult because they're not used to doing it.
Mm-hmm.
How do we even start with something like that? Now we're talking, by the way, for those who are confused about our categories for today. We're talking about Dr. Donald Williams' book, Answers from Islam, The Enduring Apologetics of C.S. Lewis, which the link is in the description. You can order a copy there.
Answers
And
from
I would
Aslan.
recommend that you do, yeah.
Not Islam, actually.
Not Islam. Did I do that again?
Yeah, only in the Designer Jesus collection.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, there is, it's like Star Trek's mirror universe. Where they go into this other universe where they're all there, but they're the opposite, and the Enterprise is full of evil people. So in the mirror universe, there is the book Answers from Islam by that Donald Williams.
Right.
That's not the one we're talking about.
That's exactly correct. So,
yeah.
Okay, you're on again. Now that we've interrupted you sufficiently.
Okay. Yeah, I was saying, why would you want this book? If you're into apologetics, it's dealing with a set of apologetics arguments that you need to be aware of. If you're into C.S. Lewis, you're going to be talking about something you're interested in. If you're interested in both, you pretty much have to have it. or you can't really claim to be interested in both. But the bottom line, the purpose of it is, like I said before, and let me repeat that because it's important. We're using C.S. Lewis. We're not saying, here's Lewis, repeat this stuff. Parrot him and you'll be a good apologist. No, we're saying Lewis is a role model, but we need to understand his arguments and understand why they work, why the attacks on them fail, so that we can use them. We want Lewis to be our teacher. So I'm suggesting you need to be a go-between between Lewis and the world. I'm the go-between between Lewis and you, to let Lewis be our teacher and our role model, to enable us to do our own apologetic in our own voice for our own generation. That's, if you want to be able to do that, I really think this book will be something you'll find extremely helpful. Because, you know, there's a lot of books on Lewis, and they've focused on Lewis. I don't know. There's not a lot of books on taking Lewis and showing how to connect him with the world as it has changed since he lived and as it exists now. You know, I think of Lewis as my contemporary. I was 12 years old when he died, and I'd never heard of him. And the apologetics works were from the 1940s.
So if I was since I was 4 when he died, am I his contemporary too? Just kidding.
Yeah, if you like. You know, so yeah, technically, we overlap a little bit. Yeah, he died in 1963. I was 12. I had never heard of him. I discovered Lewis, interestingly, because this parallels an awful lot of people who've had similar experiences. When I was in high school, I was raised in a Christian family, brought up in the church. I accepted Christ into my heart when I was 5 years old. I walked down the aisle of a little country Baptist church and accepted Jesus into my heart because that's what I'd been told he wanted me to do. Even though that's actually not biblical language.
Right.
But he showed up and was part of my life from then on. But by the time I was in high school, I was getting frustrated because I was wanting to know, I was running into people who had different sets of beliefs, and we're trying to discuss, you know, and I would come back and I would say, well, how do we know this is true? How do we know this is true? And it wasn't so much that that the teachers in my church couldn't answer that question. It was their attitude toward the question that was the real problem, the real stumbling block, which was, if you were spiritual, you wouldn't be asking questions like that. You just need to go back, read your Bible more, and pray harder.
Right.
Well, I probably did, but that wasn't really that wasn't really an answer to my question. And so it's having the opposite effect that they were expecting. I'm thinking, man, if the people who are the most serious about this stuff are so insecure in it that they're intimidated by the questions of a snot-nosed teenager, how can it possibly be true? And, you know, I never apostatized. I never stopped believing, but my Christian life was kind of in limbo because of this unresolved issue. And somewhere between my junior and senior year of high school, I read The Lord of the Rings, became a huge Tolkien fan. And now, if you're interested in that, we've got another book for you. It's called A Useful Companion, a reader's commentary on the Tolkien Legendarium. This is literally hot off the press. It just came out within the last couple of weeks. But at that point, I was just a fan of Tolkien because it was such a cool story and such a cool world. And somebody said, hey, if you like Tolkien, you should check out his friend, C.S. Lewis. So I said, cool. I went to the library, and all the Lewis books were checked out except for An Experiment in Criticism, which was probably the last Lewis book I needed to read at that point, but it was the first because it was there, and it was kind of interesting. But then, of course, I immediately went on into Mere Christianity, Miracles, Problem of Pain, etc., and was just blown away by the fact that a Christian mind is actually possible. Here is one. This proves if this guy did it, if this guy could think and be a Christian at the same time and be faithful Christian, maybe other people can do that too. And Lewis was treating the gospel as true, explaining why it was true, and treating it as true, and using it as a foundation for investigating everything else in the world. And I was like, you can do that? I want to do that. And I've been trying to do it ever since. So Deeper Magic on Lewis's theology, Answers from Aslan on Lewis's Apologetics are the fruit of that lifetime spent just discovering more detail about the idea. Yeah, Christianity is actually true. It's not just a religious experience, though we have religious experiences with it, but it's not just a religious experience. It's one that's based on real truth about the world. And Lewis just does a wonderful job of explaining all of that. The caffeinated crew from Colorado has got the new Tolkien book, and they're looking forward to reading it because they are discerning readers and intelligent people. And I hold them up as examples to the rest of the world that they should follow suit.
So, just a kind of a side question. Lewis didn't want to be a Christian, did he?
No, not at first. He describes himself in his spiritual autobiography, Surprised by Joy, as having been dragged kicking and screaming into the kingdom.
Yeah.
Right. But God had gotten a hold of him. And Lewis, even during his atheist period, one of the interesting things about him was he couldn't treat any idea as just an idea. If you believed an idea, then you were supposed to live by it. And he kept discovering that living by atheism wasn't really possible.
Right.
You couldn't actually live as if the world has no meaning.
Right.
And so he was resisting conversion to Christ because, when he was 9 years old, his mother had died of cancer. And as a nominal Christian then, he didn't understand the gospel. He'd been raised in the church and raised to think Christianity was true. He prayed as hard as he could that his mother would be healed, and she died. And so he concluded, based on that Christianity was completely a bunch of hogwash and a hoax. And as it is true for so many atheists, it's not just that they don't think God exists, they're angry at God over something.
Yes, exactly.
And, understandable if you blame God for the death of your mother because you prayed for her to be healed and she wasn't. The last thing Lewis wanted to be was a Christian. But he kept discovering that he couldn't live by his atheistic philosophy. All the most intelligent and interesting minds he was encountering amongst his friends, people like Tolkien, Charles Williams, Neville Coghill, etc., were believers, were Christians. And authors like G.K. Chesterton and George MacDonald that he loved were Christians. And as he kept thinking through these things, he eventually came to the conclusion, it's true. I'm going to have to just give up, lay down my arms, surrender, and come home. And of course, once he had done that, then he discovered the just unending, unspeakable joy that there is in knowing God through his son, Jesus Christ, and in following Jesus. But yeah, he was not wanting to go there. Yeah.
Right. Well, and I find that I have a friend, in fact, we sent a prayer request yesterday on someone I'm talking to. He's become a very good friend. When we first met, within a few minutes, I tend to be able to do this fairly well. We got into a discussion on the existence of God, and he pointed out, he says, "Well, I'm an atheist," and I said, "Well, okay, you're a nice guy, and there's a lot of things I like, and I'm glad we're becoming friends, but I have to tell you, you're just not that smart." And he said, "What are you talking about?" I said, "Well, in order to know that God doesn't exist, and that's your assertion, you would have to have all the knowledge of the universe, past, present, and future, to know that God never existed, doesn't exist anywhere, and never will exist in the future. And you're smart, but you're not that smart." So then we got into another discussion on how certain things are just wrong. And I said, well, that's a question of morality. But if there is no God, then there is no morality. So these are really powerful questions that can be used to talk to someone who makes these claims.
Yeah. I earlier talked about atheists sawing off the limb that they're sitting on with the argument from reason. But with the problem of evil, the problem of pain, the same thing happens.
Right.
The problem of evil, if God were good, he would want to eliminate evil. If God were omnipotent, he'd be able to eliminate evil. But evil exists, therefore either God is not good or not omnipotent. Probably the most effective argument in the atheist's toolkit.
Mm-hmm.
Probably people who will give you a reason for being atheists, that one gets trotted out more than anything else, probably. But wait a minute. You're saying, I don't believe in God because evil is incompatible with God's existence. But if God doesn't exist, there's no such thing as evil. There's
Right.
just circumstances in the universe we don't happen to like. But that's not a good reason for disbelieving in anything. I mean, it's like you can't have your cake and eat it too. You can't have your evil and complain about it too. Because the atheist solution to the problem of evil is too simple. It makes evil go away, and it makes human beings who have a meaningful existence that matters go away. And so, yeah, it's hard to understand why God permits, on a theoretical basis, it's not that hard to understand why God permits some evil, because it makes free will possible, and it makes significant choices possible. It makes meaningful lives possible. But does it have to be this much? Does it have to be that particular thing?
Right.
That just is so gut-wrenching to me personally? It's hard to answer that. But if you decide, okay, the solution is to become an atheist, you didn't solve the problem. You just made it worse, because now you have no basis for even calling anything evil
Or good. What about
has stuff in it we don't like.
What about the problem of good?
Yeah.
Conversely.
Because yeah, if you get rid of evil, you just got rid of good too. If all we mean by good is stuff in the universe that we like, that's not a very significant thing.
Yeah.
Because
go
ahead.
Okay. So
Yeah.
So we kind of went through the breakdown of what the chapters are like. What sort of examples, we've given a few, but of the um Mere Christianity. Why is that a powerful book for someone? Because it doesn't really get into deep theology, does it?
Well, it gets into the Trinity, it gets into the incarnation, gets into the atonement, although it it kind of is a little bit too vague when it talks about the atonement, but it gets into it and it talks about different theories of how the atonement works. And Lewis says, what you have to believe in is that Jesus' death pays for our sins. You don't have to believe in a theory about how it works, which is technically true, although the Bible actually does tell us more about how it works than Lewis allows for there. But Mere Christianity, it starts where people are.
Right.
So, moral argument. Lewis doesn't say, here's a moral argument for theism. He says, have you noticed that people get into arguments? And they say things like, that's my seat. I got there first. Or, give me a bit of your orange. I gave you some of mine yesterday. And all of these arguments they get into, they assume they are based on the idea that there is a standard of right behavior that exists that means one of us wins the argument and the other one loses it.
Right.
And most people on both sides of the argument are appealing to the same standard. So where does this come from? And what does it mean? And his chapter title is like Right and Wrong as a Clue to the Meaning of the Universe. And it takes him about 2 or 3 chapters to finally get to the point where he's saying the only logical explanation for why this is so is there is a real right and wrong. And if there's a real right and wrong, that's a personal thing. It has to come from a personal God. So the thing that makes the book effective is Lewis starts from ground zero. He doesn't start assuming that you know or believe anything.
Right.
But he starts with things that everybody can relate to, the people arguing on the bus. And then he doesn't use technical language, but he communicates biblical answers in very clear language. The problem that modern readers, contemporary readers, many of them have with it is not the lack of clarity, it's their lack of skill in following linear arguments. So we've got to maybe simplify things even more and get it down to, one step at a time.
Right.
And it may take us a long time to get them all the way to where they need to go. The book was very effective doing that with American and English audiences in the 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, even the 80s.
Mm-hmm.
And there are still some people you can just hand it to.
Right.
I think the Chuck Colsons of the world who will get saved just because somebody gave them the book, I think they're going to be fewer as time goes on because of some of the things we've been talking about. But if you're the guy talking to the person, there's nobody who can train you better in understanding what the issues are, what the questions are, what the answers are, and how to use your own experiences and your own language to take these people along with you. That nobody is a better role model for that. Nobody is a better teacher for that than Lewis.
All right. We have I'm
good to try to help Lewis do that job.
I have a very good question right at the beginning so that people understand it. Define a linear argument, please. You keep using that term. I'm not sure of what it is.
A linear argument is an argument that goes in a line from point A to point B, C, and D. I'll give you an example of one. All men are mortal. Socrates is a man. Therefore, Socrates is mortal. Okay. Now, if it's true that all men are mortal, and if it's true that Socrates is a man, then it must be true that Socrates is mortal. And so it's linear in that it goes along a trajectory. It's like if you miss the first step, the second step doesn't mean anything. You got to be able to put the first step and the second step together,
right?
To get to the third step.
And this is more commonly known as a syllogism or logical syllogism.
The example I gave was a classical syllogism. Yes.
It has a major premise, a minor premise, and a conclusion.
Right.
And sometimes they're more complicated than that. So, so what we're talking about is the ability for someone to follow a line of reasoning where premises are established, that conclusions are drawn from these premises based on evidence.
Mm-hmm.
And then finally you come to one, usually, or either one major conclusion or a set of conclusions. It requires attention. It requires a person to focus on what's going on. Whereas today, what we usually have are little sound bites,
Right.
where people usually are arguing a series of logical fallacies, appeal to emotions, attack of the individual instead of the thesis. You can go just look up informal or logical fallacies, either of those two, and you get a whole laundry list, a very long one, of things you see every day on social media that are not even arguments in themselves, let alone can you build them, put them together in such a way as to form an argument, and yet that's what people do. They don't know squat about the rules of logic.
Right. So
I get my dander up, as you can see.
Yeah. And you're right. Linear means you're going in a line and you've got to follow the line. Point A, B, C, D, E, F, G, however many there are. What happens often is that you get a series of syllogisms where the conclusion of the first one becomes the major premise
for the next one
of the next one.
Yeah.
And so in order to get the impact of that argument, you have to be able to remember the whole thing, where you came from, see the whole line as it's moving along, and see that there's not a flaw anywhere. So all men are mortal. Socrates is a man. Socrates is mortal. If it's true that all men are mortal, and if it's true that Socrates is a man, then it has to be true that he's mortal.
Right.
Now, it's going to get complicated because people will start arguing about terms. What do you mean by mortal? Well, it means capable of dying. Well, all men haven't died. You may question this when it comes to us, but I assure you that we are not zombies being animated by some strange spirit. No, we're actually still alive doing this show. Jesus died, so he had to be mortal. His physical body was capable of dying and did it. Enoch and Elijah didn't die, but they were mortal. I mean, they could have died. It was just something intervened to keep that from happening. So, yeah, all men are mortal. All men, and then you might have to back up and say, okay, all men who don't yet have their resurrection bodies are mortal. Okay. You got to agree then on the terms. And then if that's true, okay, and Socrates is a man. Wait a minute, was Socrates a man? What if I have a dog named Socrates? Well, that won't fit. I mean, it has to be all men are mortal. Socrates has to be a man. So you might have to establish historical evidence that Socrates existed. He was human. Here's the evidence for that. Plato, his disciple, gives us testimony that he existed and he died. If the first premise is true, the major premise, and if the second premise is true, then the conclusion has to be true. It
Has to
cannot
follow
escape.
necessarily. Yeah.
But what if I say all men are mortal? Socrates is mortal, therefore Socrates is a man.
That's not
That
necessarily
doesn't
true.
work.
No.
Because if I name my dog Socrates, he could fit right into that. He'd be
Right.
mortal, but it wouldn't make him human. So you
Right.
got to be careful how you set your syllogism up so that it actually works and is actually valid. And of course, the second one I used, the invalid one, sounded pretty much to a beginner pretty much like the first one. And you have to actually follow it step by step to see, yeah, the first one works, the second one doesn't. And then down the line. Now, Lewis is linear in that if you miss the point of the first paragraph, you're not going to get the second paragraph.
Right. Because they're
Everyone
linked together. Right.
Everyone leads out from the last one to the next point in a straight line. And you follow the line from the beginning to the end, and you understand the argument.
Okay.
And
Now
the current
I'm
generation really has a problem with that. They've not been taught. Why don't they teach logic in those schools?
I don't know.
Says Professor Kirk. Logic. Why don't they teach logic in those schools? Well, we used to, but we don't anymore.
Well, that is absolutely, unfortunately, true.
Yeah.
And they don't oftentimes actually teach definitions about what because we're in now narrative mode. We're telling stories, and you can believe whatever you want about the story. So that makes the whole communication issue even more difficult.
And it's one of the things that makes Lewis so fascinating is that he takes the linear logical thing and he takes the narrative thing and blends them seamlessly together.
Yes, right.
So you get the Narnian trilemma. That if you understand that Professor Kirk's reasoning, we have to assume Lucy's telling the truth. Then you're prepared when you grow up and read Mere Christianity to get the trilemma there. Jesus must really be God unless I'm prepared to call him a liar or say he was nuts.
Right.
And of course, nowadays there are people who are much more willing to do that than they were when Lewis wrote. But still, if you're going to actually deal with the character of Jesus as he's presented by the Gospels, it's not easy to make the case that this was an immoral person who would lie about something that important. Not easy to make the case that he was totally off his rocker and belonged in an insane asylum. The most sane and perfectly balanced
individual
and righteous human being who ever walked the earth.
Well, we could go on with this for quite a long time because it's a fascinating aspect of communicating what truth is.
Yes.
However, we are coming down to the wire here a little bit over time, and I'm going to ask Ron if he would do us
Can you
a courtesy.
hold on for just a second?
I can. I
think I accidentally closed out PowerPoint.
It's all in Plato, said Professor Kirk. It's all in Answers from Aslan. If
Answers
the
from
hour has made you the least bit curious, it's all here.
I didn't even notice that I closed out the requisite software until
I called on you
until you called on me in class. So let's give credit to whom credit is due. Our resident cult leader profiler is Neil before me. Our wardrobe manager is See How It Fits You. Culinary services are provided by Chef Ham and Cheese. Our tinfoil hat provisioner is Just In Case. Jehovah's Witnesses coverage comes from Armageddon, and D. Opposer, our Mormon Archives manager, is Polygamous. Our Liberal Denominations bureau chief is Lucy Goosey. Our transgender issues coverage comes from Ben Hur. Special correspondent for cults based on the Hindenburg disaster and flying turkeys, Ode to Humanity. Our fact-checking supervisor is Yolik. Polling technical assistance comes through Murky Research. Our legal advisors are at the law firm of Dewey, Cheatham & Howe. Our grievance resolution director is Giovanna Pisami. Director of Privacy Assurance is Wiretapping. And original idea sourcing comes from Drew A. Blank. The Unknown Webcast is a production of Midwest Christian Outreach, Inc. in cooperation with Emergency Manicure Productions. Both of them are solely responsible for this content, although you will never be able to prove that in a court of law.
Never happened.
We're still waiting.
Yeah,
We're
still
waiting.
All right. See you all later.
Hasta vista.
By the way, for
yeah.
those who like to join us live, we will be not live we will be alive, but we won't have a live webcast for the next 2 weeks.
Now, does that take us to the Tuesday between Christmas and Easter then? I mean, Easter, Christmas and New Year's then?
Well, we can talk about that offline here, but it's not next Tuesday and the Tuesday after, we're not live.
Oh, I think that takes us to January 6th then. Okay, thank you.
January 6th is our next one. So see you all later.